Hi everybody, and thank you again for joining me on another episode of Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Nanlux FL-28. This is their brand new compact lightweight Fresnel, which is made for the 900 Evokes and also for the 1200 and 1200B Evoke. Now this weighs in at only 5.7 kilograms. That's including the barn doors. So it is light enough that it attaches directly to the front of the light without a stirrup, and it has a rather unique flood spot mechanism. Okay, so how much does it cost and what do you get for your money? Well, I've seen it advertised for $690 US and 1,130 Australian dollars. Now for that you get the Fresnel, you get the barn doors, and it comes in a bag. Okay, so let's quickly go over some points of difference with this compared to other Fresnels. And the first one is the flood spot mechanism. So this is in full flood, and as you can see, the lens is inside the housing getting snooted a little bit. So it doesn't have the same flood to spot ratio as the bigger Fresnel, and it moves forward and backwards on 4 jack screws. So have a look at that, very, very smooth movement. Now, just to give you some idea of how smooth this is and how easy it is to operate, if you have it pointing directly upwards, it will flood spot with just one finger. Point it directly down. Same thing, one finger. Now let's talk about the lens. And the lens is so lightweight that I'm going to take a guess that it's made of acrylic, because it feels like plastic, but it's far too heat resistant to be just plastic. Now, when you take a look at it, you can see hundreds, if not thousands, of microscopic lenses, and they're all on the back or on the inside. So where's the Fresnel? Well, the Fresnel is actually etched onto the front. Now, it's etched so fine that you can't actually see it. So how do I know it's there? Well, I can feel it. So if I push my finger into the lens and then try to move my finger, you can see my finger goes in a circle because it's in the grooves. So there must be hundreds of individual grooves there, individual lenses etched into the front of this. And that results in very fine barn door cuts with next to no convexing or concaving. Now, one thing that Nanlux has definitely improved with this Fresnel is the bafffolding around the air vents. There is no direct light coming out of the air vents at all. Now note there I said direct light. There is some ambient light that still comes out because the bafffolds are white, and white surfaces reflect light, so you do get a bit of a glow. And I'm guessing they've gone with white here because black probably absorbed too much heat. So what I'm going to do in a sec is I'm going to turn all the other lights to black. I'm going to have the 1200B here go to full power, and I've got the barn door shut, so the only light that's going to be in the room is any light that's leaking out of this thing. Now, I'd highly recommend that you never do this because you're trapping too much heat. So what you're going to see here is if I put my hand at about this distance, my hand will illuminate, but the back wall, which is exactly 1 meter behind the light, will not be illuminated. Now, when I get to full spot, there is a little bit of direct light that comes out of the front. So you get a little hard slash of light. You'll see that on my hands, but probably not see it on the back wall. Okay, let's have a look, and I want to do this real quick. Okay, so you can see a bit of a glow on my hand there, but not on the back wall. As I spot up, there is more glow. Now here, we're starting to get in spot that hard beam of light that I was talking about. Now, I don't think this is going to be an issue. I don't think in situations where you're using something like this at this sort of firepower, I don't think that glow is going to illuminate anything around you. Now, on the back of the Fresnel here, you have markers that indicate where you are in the flood spot range. So we've got a marker here saying 20 degrees, 25 degrees, 30 degrees, and so on around the unit. And as you rotate it, you have a blue marker come up, and that is the point at which you're at. So here I'm at 20 degrees, 25 degrees there, 30 degrees there, 35 degrees there, and maximum flood. Another improvement they've done is spring-loaded ball bearings in the barn door mount. Now this supplies a bit of friction between the barn doors and the body. So for example, if I have the top barn door angled out like this, it's not going to spin around under its own weight. It also supplies enough friction and tension that the barn doors aren't going to move around in the wind or make an excessive amount of noise. Now in the intro, I said this Fresnel is made for the 900C, the 1200 and 1200B. Now it can work on the 2400. Now I can do this via the recognition chip, which reduces the light to 50% output. So if you choose this smaller Fresnel over the larger FL-35, are you making any sacrifices? Well, yes, you are. There's a little bit of sacrifice in the brightness. If you're running a 900C here through the larger FL-35 Fresnel, you will get 17% more brightness. Now, if you're running a 1200B, you will get between 19 to 23% more brightness through the larger Fresnel, depending on which CCT you dial in. Also, the smaller Fresnel here doesn't have the same flood to spot range. This thing has a maximum flood of 43 degrees and only spots up to 17. In terms of other possible negatives, the flood to spot ratio in terms of brightness is only 3.5 to 1. So what I mean by that, in full spot, you only get 3.5 times more light than you had in full flood. Now, some of our big studio Fresnels back in the day, they had an 8 to 1 or a 10 to 1 ratio, depending on the brand. So 3.5 to 1 is not a huge amount. The next possible thing to be aware of as a negative is the light does skew a little bit towards magenta when it goes through this Fresnel by less than the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel, so somewhere around 0.0020 delta UV. So chances are you're not going to notice this by eye, with one exception, and that is if you're using the 1200Bs in their lower kelvins like 3200, because the 1200B is already slightly magenta to about that amount. So if you use the Fresnel, it's going to be twice as magenta in those lower kelvins, to roughly about the equivalent of a 1/4 correction gel. Okay, the pros. Well, obviously the small size and the lightweight, but also this thing does really good barn door cuts. Okay, let's have a look at how this attachment performs on the 900C. Now it does have a bit of colour fraying on the very edge of the beam, like most Fresnels do, but I don't think this is anything to be particularly worried about. And it doesn't seem to be an issue in your lower kelvins. Now the light does barn door cut very well. And notice there's hardly any concaving or convexing. Now let's take a look at how it spots up. Now there is some noticeable double shadowing, but it's what I would expect from a Fresnel of this size. Now the 43-degree beam angle is a bit limiting if you're looking to light a large exterior. In this scenario, the 60-degree reflector would really be ideal. However, we are still getting quite a large amount of deep saturated colour, and note that we're easily overpowering the street lighting. Now take a look at how well this unit does its barn door cuts. Now let's take a look at how well we can box it up. Now let's have a look at spotting it up. Notice at the end of the spot, the spill light level does increase. Now let's take a look at how this performs through a window at a distance of about 6 meters. And it definitely has the beautiful shadows that you'd expect from a Fresnel. The shadows are the same regardless of CCT or colour. Now let's have a look at it in full spot. Now there has been a bit of a sacrifice here in terms of shadow quality, but I have to say, I'm actually quite surprised at how the shadows are holding up. Now let's do a comparison to the supplied 45-degree reflector. Set to 3200 Kelvin, the reflector comes in at 61% brighter. Set to 5600 Kelvin, the reflector comes in at 62% brighter. Now let's do a comparison to the 1500C. And I just want to point out with the 1500C, I set a matching beam angle of 43 degrees. Now you might find the results surprising. At 3200 Kelvin, the aperture is 73% brighter. At 5600 Kelvin, the aperture is 61% brighter. However, at red, the Evoke is 67% brighter. For green, the Evoke is again brighter with 77% more brightness. And with blue, the aperture is 53% brighter. Okay, let's see how it performs on the 1200B. Now there doesn't seem to be any noticeable colour fraying towards the edge of the beam. And it does barn door cut rather well, but you do have to box in the edge of the beams. And let's take a look at the spot. And the shadows are what I would expect from a Fresnel of this size. Now it does seem to me to have a slightly wider beam angle than when used on the 900C. Now let's have a look at the barn door cuts. And in this scenario, I don't think they're as sharp as with the 900C. Now in a second, I'm going to spot it up. When I do this, note how the barrel works. As the light spots up, the spill light increases. I don't think this is necessarily a problem, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind. Now let's have a look how the light performs through a window at a distance of about 6 meters. And as you would expect, it's got a nice quality of shadows. Now let's do a comparison with the supplied 45-degree reflector. Set to 3200 Kelvin, the supplied reflector comes in at 70% brighter, and set to 5600 Kelvin, the supplied reflector comes in at 75% brighter. Alright, so let's compare this to something now. So the only thing I've reviewed that is 1200 watt bicolor and has a Fresnel is the Godox. Now, the Godox in terms of brightness absolutely pulls the pants down on this Nanlux Evoke. So why have I chosen these in my personal arsenal over having that Godox? Because I did get that Godox for free and I could keep it at the end of the review, but I chose to sell it. Well, here's the thing. This thing's small, so I can easily pack it into my van, and I'm not as young as I used to be. So this thing, I can cope with this. I can manage this if I'm working by myself. It's very lightweight. Where the Godox is very, very big and very heavy. I can't store it in my vehicle, and I definitely can't move it around the set without someone giving me a hand, but it is crazy bright. At 3200 Kelvin, it comes in 73% brighter, and at 5600 Kelvin, it comes in at 70% brighter. Now, for some of you, that brightness difference is worth the weight and size. All right, so just my closing thoughts. I've got 4 Evoke 1200Bs and 2 of these 900Cs, and I've just ordered 2 of these Fresnels. So I think the Fresnel is going to play with the 900Cs more. In fact, this has already played with the 900Cs on a few jobs and it's worked awesome. Finally having that barn door control with a light that can give me more firepower than a 600 has been absolutely amazing. Very, very handy to have on set. I don't know if it's going to play with the 1200s because currently I use my 1200s where I want a lot of firepower. So they're either going through a diffuser or they're bouncing off something or direct sunlight through a window. And in each of those cases, the reflectors do a fantastic job, particularly through a window because the reflectors have nice shadows. But who knows, it might come into play. And just my closing thoughts here in terms of this as a setup for me, in terms of me buying a couple of these, it really does feel to me like Nanlux understand where I am in the market. Like that Godox light, fantastic. I mean, huge amount of light output, but too big for me to carry, too big for me to store. Whereas Nanlights seem to understand that somebody like me needs something compact. Okay, maybe it's not the brightest thing in the market. Maybe it's not built to stop a bullet, but it's still strong. But you know, the balance between weight and output, they seem to have got that right for somebody like me who works out of small vans or a box truck. Anyway, catch you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear. Take care. Now, some of you may have noticed that my readings are below the published readings for this Fresnel. So I just want to verify a few things. My readings were taken with the lights set to 100% brightness. The lights were set to maximum output, not constant output, and the fans were set to smart mode. I measured my distance from the front of the lens barrel, and I verified my distance of 3 meters using 2 tape measures.